Thank you for joining today's webinar on COVID-19 response. Today's webinar is going to be about how businesses can ensure continuity using Scalable IT help desk. The new coronavirus has put in a new challenge in front of various businesses. With almost 100% of the employees working from home, working remotely, the IT teams are burdened with catering to the different needs of the employees. It could start from anything as simple as setting up the VPN to complex scenarios. At Freshworks, our CIO, Prasad Ramakrishnan, has come up with a neat strategy that can help businesses all over the world to ease the process of ensuring business continuity during pandemics. For this webinar, we have our CIO, Prasad Ramakrishnan, presenting the strategy that he has come up with. To say a few words about him, he's an amazing, efficient CIO in our company. And he's not only a CIO, he's also the information security officer. With that, with these big roles on his head, he is also a great father of 2 kids. He also owns a cute Shih Tzu dog. He loves reading and he enjoys traveling with his kids, bringing new experiences to them and himself. And he just doesn't stop there. He also contributes to his community greatly. He contributes to schools and religious circles in whatever way he could. And also, he has mentored a lot of bright youth minds, shaping their careers. Now, before I begin the webinar, I'd like to give you a small disclaimer. I'm hosting this webinar from home where I have 3 dogs living with me. So if you hear an occasional barking, please bear with me. Let me hand over the webinar to Prasad. Hi, Prasad. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Hema. How are you? Thank you for the lovely introduction here. And a quick disclaimer from me as well. I have a Shih Tzu dog who loves to bark whenever somebody walks outside my door. So if there is background noise, I apologize in advance. So today I'm going to cover 3 broad topics. How do we go about doing business continuity planning during pandemics? And I'll also talk about how we go about BCP during other types of disasters. How do we make working from home possible at scale? And another important aspect which we need to cover during a BCP scenario is how do we handle asset management when people are working remotely? And then I'll also give you some tips and tricks which have worked for us and which I'm sure will be relevant to a lot of you as well. So I think the greatest example to give when we talk about business continuity planning is the show which I watched during this BCP mode because I'm working from home. I went on a binge watch and started watching this Netflix series called Designated Survivor. And if you look at the reason why the Health and Human Secretary, which is Kirkman, was kept in a location which was away from Capitol Hill when the State of the Union was going on, was a BCP plan for the federal government. When something goes on where a disaster strikes and pretty much the entire chain of command as it relates to the US government is taken down all at one time, in order to ensure continuity of government, you always have somebody from the cabinet stay at a remote place. And if you look at what ended up happening, Kirkman ended up becoming the president. Then he had to pretty much build the entire cabinet from scratch, build the entire Congress from scratch, the Supreme Court, and so on, right? And that's a great equivalence of the type of situation that we are in, right? Where it was a medical disaster which started in one part of the world, which we thought is going to be contained there, but very soon it moved to another part of the world, and now we have a worldwide disaster. So most people think that BCP is all about technology, right? Most people confuse the word BCP with just disaster planning. But if you look at it, it's actually the classic trifecta that we call within IT. It's a combination of people, processes, and technology that you need to take into consideration when you talk about BCP planning. Right? From a technology perspective, we need to make sure that we are able to provide the technology infrastructure, not only to our internal stakeholders and employees, but also to our customers, to our partners, to our suppliers, to make sure that the technology infrastructure continues to remain. It's also about processes, and we'll cover some of that in the future slides. But one thing I want to focus on is about people. From a company perspective, the best way to handle a BCP scenario is to make sure that it is ingrained in the company's culture, right? If the company doesn't have the culture of having people work from home, or doesn't support the fact that things are going to be in a new normal, it makes it all the more difficult for the remote employees who are working from home to continue to do their job, right? So in order to be successful in a BCP mode, focus on all three aspects. Focus on the company and the company culture. How do we handle the situations that come up from an employee perspective? How do we handle the various processes? And I'll talk about some of those in the upcoming slides. And then how do we handle the technology aspects, right? So in terms of the parameters that go into determining your BCP plan, you need to look at it across two broad categories here. One is, what is the scope of the impact? And then what is the scope of the affected services? When we talk about the scope of the impact, it could be a local impact, it could be a regional impact, it could be a national impact, or a global impact. An example here is, I'm based out of sunny California here, and this is earthquake country. If there's an earthquake that happens in California, in many cases, that is obviously a disaster, and we need to put a BCP plan in place for our local office here in California. But the scope of the affected services and the scope of the impact is more local. And if it's an earthquake that's in multiple regions within California, it could be a regional impact, right? Or if you have a power outage situation, which causes the entire California grid or the New York grid or the Ohio grid to go down, it would be more a regional type of an impact. Or think about the initial way by which Corona spread. It was more a national impact where China was the only country that was impacted, where especially people coming from the Wuhan province, it was more restricted to that, and then it kind of spread throughout China. So it started as a national impact, but then soon spread over to a global impact. The way you plan for these various scenarios is different, right? If it's a local impact, the scope of services that you need to provide, the scope of the infrastructure that you need to provide, the business continuity that you need to do from a processes perspective, from a technology perspective, and a people perspective is different in each of these scenarios, right? So typically, what are the services that are impacted, right? You have facilities that are impacted. You have computing infrastructure that is impacted. You have network infrastructure that is impacted. And obviously, the people that are associated with this, they're also impacted. So let's look at facilities. So from a facilities perspective, if you have say an earthquake or a flood, you may not have access to your office facilities. And if you have all of your infrastructure and all of the dependent infrastructure available only within your office, your capability to handle a BCP mode is severely restricted, right? So as a company, you need to think about what do we need to do to ensure that we are able to do business continuity if we encounter a situation where we are not able to access the facilities, right? To give you another example, if there is a tsunami or a flood or an earthquake, and the sad news is all of these have happened just in the last 10 years, right? If you look at different parts of the world, all of these disasters have happened in different parts of the world in the last 10 years. What do you do when there's a flood and you're not able to access the facilities? Do you have the ability now to continue to operate the way you want to operate without needing to access the facilities? What do you do about computing infrastructure? Now, many companies are in a mode where everybody has a laptop, but there are quite a few companies where that may not be possible. Think banks, for example, right? You cannot have the teller have a teller machine at home and then dish out money to all the people coming to their house, right? They need to be in a facility, in a bank, and the type of computing facilities that they need is more restricted to within the facility, right? So from a bank's perspective, ATMs provide some form of BCP for for the general public, right? But then you get into the situation of how do you keep the money within the ATM replenished? Because the money is going to run out, and if the facilities are not accessible, how do you ensure that you keep those replenished, right? Which is where the banks need to come up with other alternative ways. And if you look at all the innovation that's happened in the banking sector, example, you have now extensive usage of Zelle and other such online payment mechanisms where you're moving to a cashless society, right? So some of these innovations have actually enabled us to get into a BCP mode, even, for example, in the banking sector. If you look at what's happening now with this medical disaster, some people are not able to go to the doctor's office, or the doctor's offices and the hospitals are so backed up where you're not able to bring in enough patients. So doctors have resorted to more a telehealth type of a model. That is their BCP plan, where they actually now use Zoom and other such technologies to be able to remotely look at what the patient is going through and prescribe the medication that the patient has to take to start getting better. The other service that typically gets affected is your network, right? If there's an earthquake, for example, not only are the wireless and the Wi-Fi connectivity that you have, or the network connectivity you have, not only is it affected for the consumer, it is also affected for the business, right? The core network lines which enable you to do traffic to the various internet sites, that is severely impacted. So what do you do in those type of situations? So here is where coming up with creative ways where you have failover zones. So from a SaaS product company perspective, and we are a SaaS product company, what we have is multiple availability zones. So that even if one zone of, say, Amazon gets impacted, we have multiple availability zones using which the quality of service that we are able to provide to our customers is not severely impacted. We can fail over to another availability zone, because if there's an earthquake or something, it's not going to happen in all parts of the world at the same time, right? So these are just parameters that you need to keep in mind as you are preparing your BCP. Now, most companies make the mistake of saying, you know what, BCP is a necessary evil for me for getting SOC 2 compliance, or for me to be ISO compliant and so on. And so most practitioners, what they do is they go into SANS Institute, or they go into Google and just search for BCP, pick out a plan from the internet, and then say, you know what, this is the plan that I'm going to adopt and take care of the documentation requirements that I need to take care of for my SOC 2 initiatives or for my ISO initiatives. In my honest opinion, that's a bad thing to do, because the BCP plan that you need to define for your organization is specific to your organization. What the template that you get from the internet is going to give you is kind of industry best practices in terms of the things that you need to cover. But the BCP plan is unique to you as a business. It is unique to your employees. It's unique to your customers. It's unique to your stakeholders. So make sure that whatever plan you draw up is unique to what your business scenario is. Okay. Now, the other aspect that we need to cover, and that this gets into some of the processes, right? How do you prepare for the BCP? Most people try to say, you know what, business continuity planning is about keeping business as usual, and that's a myth. People need to expect a new normal in the BCP mode. Not all services that you normally provide in a normal business as usual mode will be available in a BCP mode, because what you want to do is take the available resources that you have and channelize them to whatever is the most mission critical services that the business needs to run. Example, we need to still continue paying our employees. We still need to be able to keep track of all of our CRM transactions. We still need to be able to take care of paying our vendors. We still need to be able to take care of expense reports, right? For expense reports that were filed. We need to be able to provide support, customer service and support to all of our employees. What do we need to do to keep these critical services running, right? As an example, most companies now don't have field events, right? So the amount of money and effort that you're putting towards field events can now be channelized towards doing webinars such as the one we are doing now, or for doing other types of activities. So acknowledge that there is going to be a new normal in the BCP mode, and start putting plans saying, if this is this type of a disaster, here are the portfolio of services that we are going to be offering, right? From an IT perspective, one of the things I did was work with the stakeholders well ahead of this in terms of trying to find out what do we need to do when we hit different types of disasters, and what are the critical services that you need in different types of scenarios. And that's what enabled us to quickly, rapidly say, you know what, we'll go from an optional work from home, which is what we enacted initially, to a mandatory work from home. And we acknowledge that some services will not be available. Look for unavailable services. And here's an example where most companies in the BCP mode have enabled a mandatory work from home. Some of this is stipulated by the local government, where there are countries where they've said the country's shut down. For example, in parts of Asia where they've said the country is shut down for 21 days or 28 days, right? In which case you cannot even get out of the house. With so many people now connecting to the internet, you're going to have a strain on the public internet, right? Where public internet was built to handle a certain amount of load. Now we are going to have a lot more load getting into this. So plan for that. What do we need to do secondary internet service for all of our employees, right? So here is where it gets into the aspect of, for every single service that you have, identify a primary source and a backup source. So if you're buying from a particular retailer for all of your computer equipment, identify in advance a portfolio of 2 or 3 suppliers who can provide you computers and accessories on short notice. The last point which is mentioned here is what is called as tabletop exercises, right? And this is about building what's called muscle memory, right? When you have a disaster, how are people within management, how is leadership going to react when such a scenario occurs, right? And this is where you bring the senior leaders into a room and talk to them and say, team, this is what the scenario is. We just learned about an earthquake that's happened in this particular part of the world. What is going to be a first response? Or we know that, okay, we are hearing about COVID spreading from Wuhan to other parts of the world. What is going to be your response? So this is where you do tabletop exercises, asking well before the actual disasters happen, to now judge the responses that are coming from the various stakeholders, so that then you can say, did we score an A, or did we score a B, or did we score a C? And then make adjustments to your process, adjustments to your training, so that you can now continue to refine the process. The one thing which I have not mentioned here is this aspect of what I call writer's block. When you're in the middle of a disaster, that's not the time for you to be writing the email, notifying your employees or your customers or your stakeholders. Write these templates in advance, write these email templates in advance, and keep them as part of your BCP plan. You do not want to be in a mode where you encounter writer's block and try to figure out, what do I put in here? Well, because there is language that you need to be careful about in terms of the way you commit to your customers, the way you commit to your employees, the way you commit to your stakeholders and the suppliers, right? So you want to have a good plan in terms of having a pre-written communication template. So let's look at the aspects of what does it take to make working from home possible at scale, right? And given that there are quite a few of you who have already joined this webinar, the fact is most of you are working from home, right? And some of these things I'm sure have already been taken care of by your companies, right? Where one is ensuring internet connectivity, ensuring a safe and a comfortable computing environment. Apologies for the spelling mistake here. Safe and comfortable computing environment, ensuring noise cancellation. So this is one thing which people may tend to overlook. When we are working in an office, the ambient noise that you get from an office, thanks to all the conference rooms that we have in most offices, there is not much of ambient noise when we are working from an office. But if you take the scenario of people working from home, similar to what Hema said during the introduction and what I said, I have a dog who likes to bark whenever somebody walks outside the house. That is going to be ambient noise. There could be the noise of the cooker whistling in the background because of the food that you're cooking. And that's something that you need to get used to, and making sure that how do you cancel out all of these noises. So there are noise cancellation technologies that are available, either in the form of hardware or in the form of software. invest in this to make sure that from a point of view of conversations with your customers and your stakeholders, you minimize the amount of noise distraction. User training. Most people know how to work from home, but the reality is there are many people who do not know how to work from home, right? There is kind of etiquette that you want to teach people in terms of the way they choose the background. If they're in a video call, if you have light operating, if you have bright light in the background, you're not going to be able to see the person's face, right? So make sure that you train the employees on work from home etiquette. And this is something which needs to be reinforced well ahead of time. And when you are in the process of putting in the BCP scenario, make sure that you reinforce this, make it available for them, send them the reminders of this. The reality with any IT equipment is meant to break, right? You're going to have monitors stop working after some time. Keyboards are going to stop working after some time, or keyboards are going to stop working after some time, right? And you're going to have possibly the computer stopping to work after some time, right? So you need to make sure that even in a BCP mode, ensure that you have the primary and the backup suppliers. Now here, the key aspect to note is your ability to service some of this is dependent on the geography that you are in. As an example, Amazon still continues to do shipping of hardware and hardware accessories here in the US and in Europe. But there are certain parts of Asia where Amazon has stopped all shipping. All the shipping is now only for medical related supplies, right? I'm using Amazon as an example. There is other online retailers where they have completely removed the aspect of shipping any non-essential supplies to people. So ensuring that you have backup suppliers in advance and planning for handing out the backup supplies to your employees in advance is something that you need to plan for from a work from home scenario perspective, right? Examples include, if you can give out an extra mouse, an extra keyboard, give it out in advance. Find out if the employee already has a home computer. If they don't have a home computer, see if you can give them a spare from one of your spares. Which brings up the other aspect, which is internet dongles. Find out if people have a reliable internet connectivity from home. If they don't have reliable internet connectivity, and if they're in a mission critical role, such as the NOC team or the SOC team or the security team, they need a backup internet supply, right? So ensure that you order for these in advance and ship it out. So in our case, what we did is, when we started thinking about the optional work from home, we actually went out and bought, in anticipation of the fact that this is going to become a prolonged disaster, we actually bought around 1,500 or 2,000 of these dongles and proactively handed it out to our employees. That's what enabled our employees to be able to connect remotely. Now, keep in mind, most mobile devices provide you the option of doing tethering. But again, we had to hand out internet dongles in geographies where tethering was not as prevalent, or the local network providers on the mobile phones, they were actually throttling the tethering connections. Last but not the least, when it comes to accessing your corporate IP, most companies have a way by which they do VPNs. So for you to be able to access corporate assets, people have to get in through a virtual private network. Now, what happens if the VPN infrastructure gets flooded and is not able to handle the capacity, right? So this is where you need to have a backup to your VPN. So some technologies here, such as a virtual desktop interface. So if you're not able to address the load from a VPN perspective, set up VDI. You can go to Amazon and do the Amazon workspaces, or you can go to Microsoft, and Microsoft has its VDI offering. So provide some kind of a VDI interface using which people can still remote and come into your computing environment, right? Like I said previously, the BCP mode tests not only the limits of your corporate infrastructure, but also the public infrastructure. Imagine everybody logging in to the available home bandwidth, right? Because all network providers have fiber running throughout the country, and they actually have had planned for a X for a certain percentage of people connecting from home. Now we are testing the limits of all of the public infrastructure as well, right? In countries like Europe, what they've done is they have throttled Netflix traffic or Amazon Prime traffic to make sure that the video quality is now at a much lower level than the normal video, right? That's because their infrastructure is not able to keep up with everybody working from home and having Netflix or other things running in the background. To get ahead of the situation, I touched upon this. You need to do capacity planning, and this is where, from an IT cookbook perspective, don't wait for a disaster to happen for you to do capacity planning. This is something you need to do well in advance and start planning for it. Now, since all of us are already in the BCP mode, doing capacity planning now, it may be a little too late, but this is something you need to now start thinking about before the next disaster comes, right? And this particular disaster that we are in, the medical disaster that we are in, is a prolonged disaster. If there is ways by which you can remotely increase the capacity of your VPN servers, if there's ways by which you can now remotely configure VDI and make it available for people to connect, go ahead and start doing that. Apply quality of service settings. Not all services need to have the same kind of speed. And this goes back to identifying what your mission critical services are. Notify your employees, telling them it is okay for you not to access these applications. It's okay for you not to use these services, but please use only these services. Where you also control it from a network quality of setting perspective so that you're using the available bandwidth for what is critical to your business. And this is where you need to have a list of what your core mission critical services are and allocate bandwidth and resources to that. So this is one way by which you can make sure that whether it is for your customers, whether it is for your employees, or whether it is for your other partners / stakeholders, knowing what is mission critical will enable you to do the quality of service. And then according to that, you can now do the appropriate capacity planning. Let's talk about asset management on remote working. Now, at Freshworks, we bring quite a few employees in on a weekly basis. Just in the last 4 weeks, we have brought in close to 150 employees worldwide into, these are brand new employees who have joined the company. Now, in locations where we could ship out laptops, like the United States and in Europe, we actually shipped out laptops to people's homes, right? We came up with a mode by which our IT engineers brought a few spare laptops or a small inventory of laptops, kept it at their home. We worked with FedEx and UPS and USPS to actually ship these out to employees' homes. This is for all the brand new employees. Now, there are certain geos where this is not possible, right? As an example, India now, they're in a 21-day lockdown where it is not possible for us to ship out a laptop. So what did we do there? In the case of India, what we ended up doing was leverage what we call as the virtual desktop, the VDI infrastructure. We asked employees to use their own personal home laptop, download the antivirus from our corporate network, and then ensure that we create a VDI session for them. So that way, they're operating as though they're working within our environment using their personal computing device. So even if the personal computing device doesn't have enough memory, doesn't have enough speed, the fact that all of the processing is done at the server level enabled us to provide the continuity of business here. In addition to onboarding, the other thing you need to look at is offboarding, right? How do you take care of ensuring that you capture the assets of the people who are leaving the business at this time, right? So this is where defining a process in advance, making sure that we have contract language to ensure that the employee knows that their relationship with the company has been terminated, disabling their access. So every company has their own offboarding checklist, right? You still have to go through your offboarding checklist, but you may be limited in your ability to have the asset being recaptured, right? The laptop cannot be, if the shipping services are not available, you may not be able to ship it back to your corporate location. So in this case, work with your legal department to come up with a language where you make it known to the employee that please understand that your relationship with the company has been terminated as of this date, and you shall not use the company resources because you want to protect yourself from a lawsuit that comes in tomorrow, right? And if you have the ability to remotely wipe your machines, right? These are in the class of solutions called the Enterprise Mobility Management, EMM solutions. If you have those installed on your employee machines, leverage that to remotely wipe the machines so that any IP that is related to the company doesn't get lost here. So we actually used a combination of these to enable us to remotely offboard a few of our employees as well. Here are a few extra useful tips that I can talk about here. Keep in mind that when you're in a BCP mode, all the rules change. Most companies have, and if you look at IT organizations, you'll have an infrastructure and an operations team, and then you'll have possibly a business analytics team, and then you'll have a business applications team, right? When you're in a BCP mode, what ends up happening is, and I use this term all hands on deck, which is basically, it doesn't matter whether you are in the infrastructure team or whether you're in the operations team or whether you're in the business apps team. We are one IT, and as far as the end users are concerned, they need to see us as one team, and whoever picks up the issue takes care of the issue. So that way we, from an end user perspective, providing a single window service so that they're not getting the bounce around is going to significantly enhance their ability to continue working from home effectively. Because think about it, when we are in an office environment, it's easy for people to walk over to your IT aisle or meet you in the near the coffee station or the water cooler and have a conversation with you. All those are not possible at this time, right? So when you're in a BCP mode, the rules of engagement as far as IT providing service to business users, all of those rules change. So ensure that you flatten your IT organization to be able to respond to user issues in a proactive and a timely manner, right? And this is what I talked about in terms of all hands on deck, right? And ensure that you have your systems, your ITSM tool. So we use our tool, which is our own product, Freshservice, to keep track of all of the end user issues. We leveled out the ticket assignment queues within our Freshservice tool, so that anybody and everybody within IT can pick up the issue. So that from an end user's perspective, they have reported the issue to my team. My team, they take care of the internal triage, right? Enable multiple modes of communication. So in a BCP mode, it's not just a formal tool such as Freshservice using which people can report issues. They should be able to report issues through Slack or through Google Hangouts or Microsoft Teams or any such mechanism that is available for collaboration. So enable multiple channels of communication with your stakeholders, because the most frustrating thing for an employee is when they're actually working from home, they're actually trying to do their job, and they feel like they're lost, right? When you're in an office environment, people don't get lost as much. They know they can just walk out to their colleague who's sitting next to them and say, hey, I'm experiencing this problem. How do I take care of it? But when they're remote and at home, they need all possible channels of communication. So leverage all of your communication channels effectively to make sure that you're receiving tickets not just from one channel, but from all channels. You can also enable WhatsApp if that's prevalent within your organization. Enable WhatsApp. Last but not the least, even though you're getting all of these tickets from these various channels, enable what is called as contextual tags, right? You want to look back a month or month and a half from now when this entire situation is behind us, and I'm really hoping and praying that it's behind us in the next month and a half. Tag your tickets as BCP mode tickets. Why? Because you want to go back to lessons learned in terms of what was the volume of tickets that you received during this mode, so that you are able to now prepare for the next disaster, right? If it requires different levels of staffing, if it requires different ways of routing issues, if you found that there were certain types of issues which took longer to resolve in this particular mode, in this BCP mode, you want to get the lessons learned, because that's one of the key tenets of ITSM. It's always about going back to what you did well and what you did not do well, and continuing to refine the service delivery model, because this will enable you to come out very strong from this current disaster, as well as prep you for the upcoming disasters. Because it's just a matter of it's not if, it's when, right? we live in a world where floods are possible, tsunamis are possible, earthquakes are possible.
Thank you very much, Prasad. That was an interesting and informative session on pandemic preparedness and IT's role in it. We definitely had a lot of key takeaways from this session. Thank you, everybody, for watching this webinar. Hope to see you soon.